Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Go 24/7 podcast. We have the crew here today, minus Dylan Sanders, Bryce Coon alongside Glenn West, and Sonny Ship for what is sure to be probably the most viewed, listened to topic regarding spring practice position previews as we get closer and closer to the beginning of spring practice for LSU. And it's the quarterback position. Guys, even Glenn, when you reported, I think it was my first day, that Brian Kelly in the post-game presser said, "Hey, Jayden Daniels is going to be the guy. Like that's the guy we're kind of rolling with," and tried to quell the concerns, the message board post about who should be the starting quarterback. This conversation is going to continue to leak into spring practice, especially if Garrett Nussmeier really shows out, and especially in that spring game that's going to be coming up at the end of that. Glenn, just kind of your thoughts here opening up. I mean, Coach Kelly said that, back in January, but where do we sit now kind of getting into the month of March where is it 1A, 1B? Is it 1 and 2? How do you see it rolling into spring practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly 1 and 2 right now, but that doesn't mean that you can't get Nussmeier some one reps. I mean, I think that's probably the most important thing the staff has got to juggle this spring is getting Nussmeier some first team reps and making sure that he's kept in the loop with this quarterback competition. You don't want him to feel like he's on the outside looking in of this room. So I think it's going to be a juggling act, honestly, with this spring. And look, I mean, the one thing that you want to see from Jayden is the improved accuracy and the improved decision making, I guess, and being more aggressive this spring. And I think that only happens when you get a lot of reps with those guys. And so I think him being the clear front runner for this job is certainly going to allow him to get in the room and get those extra reps with those receivers, with those weapons. And I'm excited to see what happens come next week when things really start getting kicked off here. Um, just really a lot to kind of dive into, but I do think that Daniels is going to be the guy for most of this spring. But you got to be able to balance that with getting Nussmeier some really clean looks and making sure that he is getting the amount of attention and reps that he deserves, because he really came on towards the end of that last season. And I think he proved that he's going to be the future of this room. You would hope that he's the future of this room, but you still got to get him involved somehow.
Sonny, you and I talked about this, when Walker Howard exited the picture about a month and a half ago now. It feels like it's been forever. Um, but you being the recruiting guy in this sense and understanding how these things work, I mean, Glenn pointed to it. It's one of those things where you have to make the guy feel involved. But as things have changed over the past 3 or 4 years, how can you ensure that instead of, you know, uh, not shooting yourself in the foot, but having a guy that says, "Hey, I still feel like a part of the plans." Is it as simple as just giving him some playing time or scheming things up specifically for him to come into a game? I mean, what do you think that this staff has to do to lay that foundation to ensure that he's a part of the future?
Well, I think something that we have to remember is that they've already been through this once. When they were here last spring and the first spring under Kelly, they were juggling four. They were trying to get all four of the quarterbacks, keep them involved. Miles Brennan, Jayden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier, Walker Howard, not make any of them feel left out. And they did a decent job of it. With all things considering, I mean, I think it's extremely difficult to do what they set out to do last year. I think it's going to be a lot easier now when you only have three quarterbacks to have to try to do that with. Ricky Collins, now he comes in to where you've got a proven starter, you've got a proven backup. So I think when he comes in this spring, he's not in the mindset of that he needs to have equal reps, that he needs to have that now it needs to be a third split down the line. He should be more of the lines of thinking that at best, you get a 40-40-20 split and you be happy about that. You should still be at Woodlawn right now. So, I think the juggling act that Glenn alluded to, there's no question that it's something that they have to do. They have to, they have to keep Garrett Nussmeier involved. And you also have to think that they're going to do that, because I don't think that what you saw in the Citrus Bowl two series for Daniels, 1 series for Nussmeier, 2 for Daniels, 1 for Nussmeier. I don't think that was just some ploy to keep Nussmeier from entering the transfer portal. I think it was something that, I think they saw against Georgia. Okay, this kid can come in, this kid can make some plays against a good team. Let's give him a chance. And when you look at the results that you saw from the Citrus Bowl against Purdue, I mean, that looked pretty damn good. It looked pretty good with what they were working with. And so I think that the mindset is probably that you're going to see that to start the season. You're going to see that during this season, that's going to be something that, we've seen Brian Kelly do that at Notre Dame. He was known for having a quick trigger with quarterbacks, for using 2 quarterbacks at a time. So, I think everything is setting up to where, as long as they do keep Nussmeier involved, as long as they keep him to where, he feels like he's going to get a legitimate chance to go out, to get snaps, to make plays, to where when he starts thinking about that NFL picture in the back of his mind, okay, I'm gonna be able to do enough in 2023, come back in 2024, his 4th year in the program, and then have enough of a sample to where he feels good about his future. And, I think that, I know that there's a lot of skeptics out there that just are waiting, that just, man, when that May 1st window gets here, Nussmeier, and don't get me wrong, that's going to be 15 days that we're waking up texting Chris Hummer like, yo, dude, anything. But, I think that if they stick to their plan that they had, if they do what they did last spring, and if the plan continues to where you see Daniels and Nussmeier both involved, like we saw against Purdue, then, I think that the juggling act, while it still needs to be done, but I think it will be a lot more manageable than it could be.
Yeah. And I think kind of just bouncing off of that, like Sonny said, you're only really managing 2 guys this year instead of 4. I mean, Walker Howard came in last year with such high expectations that there were some folks that thought he should have gotten some high valuable reps last year. But you add Ricky Collins into this mix this year. I think you can certainly take that Howard approach with him and building him along slowly this spring. And it's going to be important, I think, for Nussmeier to get a lot of those reps with some of those younger guys that are going to be on this team next year. The Kyle Parkers of the world, the Browns of the world, and just a couple of those players that you could see being back next year when he is the guy. I mean, like they want to start building that chemistry now with those players. And Nussmeier is a guy that if you talk to any receiver in that room, even dating back to last year, they love what he does for wide receivers. He's not afraid to let it go. He's going to give them opportunities to make 50-50 catches. That's probably the one part of Daniels' game that he just wasn't completely comfortable trusting himself with in his first year in the SEC last year. That's what you hope that he builds and grows on the most this offseason with another, full year with these guys to really build that trust and chemistry. But Nussmeier is not afraid to do that. And I think that's probably where you see him come into some of these games next year. When they really need to push the ball downfield, when they really feel like there's, an opportunity to get some scores in the middle parts of the game. I just think Nussmeier is going to be a great balance for this offense. And the fact that, Sonny alluded to it, that they did it for 2 games. I know the first time it was because of Daniels' injury in the SEC championship game, but there's a blueprint there, I think, to incorporate both of those guys into the offense. I think the coaching staff recognizes it, and it's just going to be about how much do they incorporate Nussmeier into it and how much do they lean on Daniels. And I think it's going to be part of the process this spring and figuring out that balance.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm excited about – go ahead.
I want to piggyback off of something Glenn said. Could you imagine the fan base if they come out against Florida State and you do that? You see that same scenario where Daniels gets the first 2 drives, Nussmeier gets the third one. Unless he doesn't get anything on the first 2 or they get a field goal on the first 2 drives. Nussmeier comes in, you go down the field, and then Daniels comes back out because that's the pre-design of it all. Could you imagine the board uproar that day.
Oh man, it'd be fantastic, and
Oh
something that I
man.
think everybody should be rooting for on this podcast. But yeah, I mean, look, it reminds you a little bit of the Jefferson Lee era, except I think
Mm.
you've got two extremely competent quarterbacks as opposed to two guys that are kind of up
Yeah.
in the air about what you're going to get from them. So I think it's a really good problem to have if they figure it out this spring and this offseason.
Yeah, and you guys were talking about the Purdue game. I mean, I think I'm excited to see what this looks like, whatever the formula they want to go with more than just 1 month of preparation. And obviously, knowing Daniels had been banged up in that SEC title game a little bit, what was he going to look like in that Citrus Bowl? But yeah, that would be interesting to watch. Real quickly, I want to go back down to Ricky Collins. Sonny, I was watching some of his film. I know that you obviously and Dylan did some stuff with him this past fall, watching and going out to his games. Specifically Collins, I mean, I like what you said about he's walking into a situation where, look, you always want to expect to compete, and you want your younger guys to want to come in and compete, but I think he has a good understanding. But this kid's still really raw, in my opinion, and also he played behind an offensive line that I think, anyone who watched his games, they would say a lot of times he was having to run for his life. He was having to create plays. What's the expectation of the staff necessarily for him to come in and compete? Just in general, I mean, is there still things he needs to polish up part of his game? Maybe what are some of those things?
Well, one thing that the quarterbacks haven't been, Brian Kelly is big on the month of January and February of the quarterbacks really not throwing much, resting their shoulders, resting their arms, and things like that. But in the early spring workouts, team workouts, the conditioning, lifting weights, and things of that nature. Man, they say Ricky Collins is just, he's a hard worker, that he's out there just grinding like a sponge, just wanting to soak up everything that he can. And that you can tell that him coming in, that Walker Howard leaving, that him coming in, that it kind of steps up his preparation a little bit, amps it up a little bit more. Because, I kind of caught myself when I said that, he should, coming in, shouldn't be worried about everybody getting a third of the reps. A 40-40-20 split would probably be, something that, he should be happy for. But then on the flip side, and I started thinking about that, I was like, but you know what? I said, you really kind of almost have to prepare him this spring to where he's only one step away from being that number 2 guy.
One injury.
Because
one injury.
One injury and one transfer away.
One transfer.
Because you're going to always have that, is Garrett Nussmeier going to, or, is someone going to woo him away? Is someone going to pull him away? With that May 1st to May 15th window, of course, NIL, you always think about that. And in these days and age, who the hell knows what could happen? But, when I started thinking about that, I was like, yeah, you kind of probably want to go ahead and give Collins a few more reps, give him a little more opportunities to where, maybe you do slice it right down and each one of them gets a third. But, as far as him as a player, I don't think that, and we saw this from Walker Howard, and we saw how highly rated Walker Howard was. Every time Walker Howard got in the game this year, I mean, he looked, he did not look like you would expect a true freshman of his recruiting ranking to look like. And that's not a knock on him. That's just, the basis of, of where quarterback development is and how crucial it is and how sometimes it takes a little bit longer for kids to kind of get acclimated to the college level. But, I think with Ricky Collins coming in, I think you're going to see them kind of look at him more as that athletic quarterback as opposed to a quarterback who is athletic early on, just because it's going to be a lot easier. We saw it with Jayden Daniels. It's a lot easier for him to use the things that can kind of fall back on him, that he doesn't have to think about as much, using his legs, using his feet. When we get to see him in the spring game, this spring and stuff, I imagine we'll see him running a good bit, not only because probably the third and second offensive line will be getting used by the defensive line, but also because, when things start to break down, his clock is going to be faster. It's going to be sped up. And so, that'd be the things that I think this spring will be the biggest, the biggest milestone that he could scratch off of his list will be slowing everything down, just slowing the game down. Because for me, that was probably the thing that when we saw Walker Howard early in the season, it looked like the game was just moving 125 miles an hour for him. When we saw him against Purdue in the Citrus Bowl, it still looked like the game was just moving so fast for him. His head's just so, just on a swivel, but I mean, going back and forth to where it looked like the Energizer Bunny, and you could just see the eyes and you could just see the nerves and the uneasiness and stuff. And so I think that'd be the biggest thing with Collins is, can you get that game slowed down for him some? Some of that's experience, and then also some of that is the familiarity and the comfort with the playbook and knowing where the people surrounding you are also, as opposed to just what you should do.
Obviously, you talked about that May transfer window, and fans are going to be sitting on pins and needles, and we'll be texting Chris Hummer wondering what's going on. But kind of wanted to get this as we kind of look ahead. Obviously, a lot of folks have been concerned about, is Jayden Daniels going to improve as a passer? How does that match up in an offense with Nussmeier, who obviously relies more on his arm talent, his arm strength? And so I want to pose this to both of you. Glenn, you can go first. I mean, what does the marriage of this scheme look like? Do they have to change a lot of things from last season? Or is this something where if Daniels takes that step, maybe it's just a natural progression to where both of these guys' skill sets can be matched, and you don't have to drastically change if they do, 2 series here, 2 series here, something like that?
Yeah, it's a heavy question. I don't know how much you have to change the offense because Daniels is just so unique with the way that he plays. You could really tell in the middle of last year they kind of found that groove of what he's going to be like at his peak. I think that middle stretch there where they beat Bama and Florida and Ole Miss. I think that was probably his best stretch of the season. And he was relying heavily on his legs then too. But what you saw was him also pulling back and, not jumping the gun at in terms of breaking the line of scrimmage every time something breaks down. He would, extend plays and, make throws and I think had a nice balance there with his game. But I mean, it's just so hard because it's recency bias, right? It's what you saw the last 2 games of the season with Nussmeier in there. I just think he showed you a lot of improvement from that first time we saw him last year. I mean, in that game against Southern, you could tell he was trying to do a little bit too much. He, was just trying to prove himself and prove that he could be a part of this offense moving forward. And he really struggled in that Southern game with, decision making and with the turnovers. That wasn't the case in the SEC championship game and in the Purdue game as well. He had a couple throws, I think or maybe one throw that was picked off in the championship game, and that was just trying to do, anything you could to get back in the game. But he was also a big reason why LSU made it a little bit uncomfortable in the second half for Georgia, and they really kind of cut that lead down to I think 10 or 11 points, and it was a lot in large part because of Nussmeier's mentality to just sling it and put the ball in a place where his receivers could go and get it. So I think you have to incorporate some of that with the offense this year. And if Jayden doesn't show you that this spring, that he's ready to take on more of that kind of role, that's where Nussmeier, in my mind, just immediately can slip in and take over for a series or two, in a game, in a crunch time situation, if you really need to get the ball downfield. I mean, it just really it just screams at you when watching the film just how, he's just so trying to think of the word, but he's so definitive in what he wants to do when he's out there with the ball and pushing it downfield. That's something you have to have as a part of this offense next year with so many guys who can go up and make plays for you. So I'm going to be really interested to see how that plays out this spring.
Sonny, any thoughts on that? What does the marriage maybe of this offense need to look like with the two guys that bring different, skill sets to the table, but if that gap closes, maybe there's not as big of an issue with it?
Yeah, I don't think it. I don't think it's going to be a big issue at all. I think if you had, if you were talking, okay, Jayden Daniels and Miles Brennan, a 2-1 situation like that, or I don't know, Zach Mettenberger and Herb Tyler, that type of thing. A couple names blasting from the past for you there, Bryce. But I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be tough at all. I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is, Nussmeier's not the dynamic runner that Daniels is, but Nussmeier's got some ability. He's got some movement skills. He can extend plays. He can move around in the backfield, and he can still run the zone read. They can still incorporate the base of their running game, whether it's Nussmeier or whether it's Daniels. Now, as far as the passing side of it, if Daniels doesn't push the ball down the field like Nussmeier does, well, then that's going to show up on tape. And when that starts showing up on tape, then that's when the coaches have to make the decision of, okay, what do we want to do from that point on? Because and I think that's really a benefit to the staff, because you're not having to change the offense. You're not having one system for this guy, one system for this guy. You're running the same system. Everybody's running the same system. So you have apples to apples that you're comparing to. Who you make this read right here. How would you make that read? Well, Daniels can't say, well, coach, you never call that play for me, so I don't know.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And so I think it's very easy to make, for those to, and I also think that's why you saw them click so well in the Citrus Bowl against Purdue with, like Glenn pointed out, only a month to really prepare for something like that. You give them you give them the first 2 months that you've already given them of the spring, rest of the spring and summer to come in and just evolve that into more. And I think it really sets up very nicely and really very easily for Sloan and Denbrock to manage.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch, I think, and we said it earlier. I mean, with more time to prepare, more time to study the film, what these guys did last year, not only in practice but in that Citrus Bowl, and say, hey, this is the best product we can put out there. Let's wrap it up with this question right here, and I think this is one of a lot of fans are debating on social media and our boards. And Sonny, we'll start with you. We'll go to Glenn. Can LSU get back to Atlanta with either guy? Does it matter to you which guy? Can they still get back to Atlanta, in your opinion?
No, I don't think. For me, whether it's Jayden Daniels or whether it's Garrett Nussmeier, my projections or predictions, forecasts for this team doesn't really change. It doesn't. I think LSU has way too many pieces returning. I think each quarterback has a dynamic trait about them that can make this offense move. And no, I don't, whether it's Daniels or whether it's Nussmeier, I'm still thinking that this is a team that should have a good chance of reaching 10 wins if they can get by Florida State in that opener. And then from there, if they do that, then it all boils down to, okay, who do you lose to in the SEC? When do you lose to them? How does that play into you getting back? But this team was on the verge of 11 wins already this year, and so I think that when you look at next year, I think that I don't think that you should see any step back. You should only see step forward.
Yeah,
Glenn, what about you?
I'm right there with him. I mean, I think look, whether you lean heavily on Daniels, you lean heavily on Nussmeier, this is a team that I think you can absolutely get back to an SEC championship, because they have a lot of continuity returning on offense. And I know that, defensively there are going to be some question marks on who fills in where. Matt House has proven in 1 year that he's capable of, mixing and matching guys that are new to the program and not having a big drop off defensively. I think they were pretty consistently on that end of the ball, pretty good at that last year. Offensively is where I think this team makes the biggest jump, not only because of the quarterback play, not only because of the continuity, but the growth of the offensive line. You would expect those guys to really come together chemistry-wise. And then it's just about, figuring out the balance between Nussmeier and Daniels. I think that's going to be the biggest piece of this offense this spring and into this offseason, because both can lead this team, I think, to an SEC championship appearance. I think they've proven that last year with the way that Daniels played, and certainly when Nussmeier stepped in the latter part of the season, he can continue and push the ball downfield when he needs to. I really like where this offense and how it's set up. to have success next year. And it's just like Sonny said, it's going to be on the coaching staff to figure out just how to incorporate both of those guys. And you got to get through this next, this next deadline, this next transfer portal deadline after spring. Going to be a lot of sleepless nights, I think, for LSU fans if things start turning the other way. But definitely, I think this is a team that can carry those two into next season and feel really good about their chances of getting back to Atlanta.
Well, there you go right there, quarterback.
Got to give kudos to my boy G-Dub for mentioning the offensive line 25 minutes in, because I wanted to mention that at the very beginning when you said the most talked about, and I'm already tired of talking about the quarterbacks. Everybody wants to talk about the quarterback. Let's talk about who's the right tackle. Yeah. Who's going to be the right tackle on the offensive line? Is it going to be Emory Jones? Do they move Miles Frazier? Do they move Jones inside? Do they start that this spring to make room for Zalance Hurd? So that's what I want to talk about. So, Glenn, that's the preview. Call me when you get that one done for the next pod.
We'll incorporate Sonny into that one for sure. Yeah,
absolutely love it.
Lots of O-line talk.
All O-line talk. It's going to be an interesting spring. Obviously, we talked about we haven't gotten to defense yet, but that's going to be where a lot of the questions may be. And heading into spring practice, maybe we see some of those things answered. Hi, this is the Good Go 24/7 podcast. Sonny Ship, Glenn West. My name is Bryce Kuhn. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're listening, wherever you may be, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your audio podcasts, make sure to give us a like, a follow, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, completely free to do that, and hit the like button, and let us know down below, what do you think of the quarterback competition? And if you have not yet, make sure to head over to Go 24/7, subscribe. We've got some great content coming out. We had a fun weekend up in Atlanta at the Under Armour Next Atlanta camp, talking to a lot of commits. We got interviews coming out all this week regarding that. And then spring practice right around the corner. And baseball's got a really big game tonight. Looking really good coming off of a nice little weekend tournament. They're going to be playing Texas tonight, and we'll have that coverage as well continuing throughout the season. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. We will talk once again. We'll move over to defense next time we meet here on the Go 24/7 podcast.